in the heart of bustling New York City, where the lights never seem to dim. There are still places untouched by brightness, abandoned tunnels, forgotten train stations, and silent cold corners beneath the streets. These are the spaces where the unseen live. And in one of these places, a boy, just 11 years old, survived for 3 years, hidden from the eyes of the world. He had no family, no electricity, no hope. But somehow, the miracle wasn't just that he survived. What he did with his pain afterward that no one saw coming? Today's story isn't a legend. It's not a beautifully written novel meant to tug at your heartstrings. It's real. Every moment, every tear, and every flicker of light in this story comes from a life truly lived. A boy who turned pain into purpose, loneliness into light, and a dark tunnel into the beginning of something extraordinary. If you've ever felt small, lost, or like you didn't matter, this story is for you. Because this boy who had nothing held something powerful inside him. A heart that refused to stop shining. Let me take you through this unbelievable journey from the forgotten shadows beneath the city to the lives forever changed by one boy's belief in light. Asterisk, his name was Elijah. He had no last name, or at least, not one he could remember. When his mother died of a drug overdose at just 8 years old, his father, if that's what you could call him, disappeared and never came back. No family, no papers. Elijah became a shadow on the streets of the Bronx, surviving by digging through trash bins and begging for leftover pizza crusts. He avoided cops, avoided gangs, avoided anyone who might see him. Everything changed on a bitter winter night when Elijah stumbled across a forgotten stairwell leading into an old, decommissioned subway tunnel. It was dark, damp, and freezing. But to Elijah, it was shelter, was the only place no one could find him, the only place he could call home. 3 years passed. Elijah made a bed from broken wood and worn-out foam he scavenged. He collected candles, tiny ones, old birthday ones, anything that could give off light. The dim glow from a vent above and those flickering flames were all he had. But to Elijah, that fragile light meant survival. It meant hope, meant tomorrow. Still existed. He didn't go to school. No one taught him how to read, but he picked up scraps of learning from discarded books. He especially loved books about light, electricity, batteries, wires, bulbs. He didn't know why, but something about light pulled at his soul. Maybe because it was the only thing that had never abandoned him. One day he found a broken radio, tossed out in a trash pile. He spent weeks trying to fix it. And then one night it sputtered to life, buzzing with static before a voice cut through. A real voice, not from his imagination. It was a segment about a lighting engineer in Brooklyn, experimenting with solar-powered lights for low-income neighborhoods. Elijah was glued to the sound. He didn't know where Brooklyn was, but in that moment he made a decision. He had to find that man because somewhere deep in the heart of a boy who had lived too long in the dark, a dream had just been lit. Asterisk, Elijah had no idea how far Brooklyn was from the Bronx. He didn't have a map, a phone, or anyone to guide him. But he had something stronger than all of that: belief. A belief that if light was real, there had to be a path to reach it. For the next 3 weeks, Elijah left the tunnel each morning and wandered unfamiliar streets, following clues from his old radio. He listened carefully to every broadcast, noting down street names, landmarks, even brand names mentioned. He began to ask strangers for directions, hesitantly, cautiously. Most people ignored him, some told him to get lost, but every now and then someone kind would point him in the right direction. One afternoon, he found himself staring at a library window, fixated on a wall map inside. A librarian noticed the ragged boy outside and gently approached him. "Do you need help, sweetheart?" Elijah nodded slowly. He told her about the radio, about the man who made lights for poor neighborhoods, and about how he wanted to find him. Moved by his sincerity, she invited him in, let him sit at a public computer, and helped him search. They found the name Mr. Thomas Harrow, founder of a small nonprofit called Light Forward, specialized in installing solar-powered lighting systems in underserved communities. Elijah clung to that name as if it were a lifeline. The next day, he made his way to the address listed in an old news article. It wasn't a fancy office building, just a rundown block of apartments and a white van with the Light Forward logo parked out front. He waited for hours just before sundown. A middle-aged man wearing a jacket with the same logo walked out of the building. Elijah's heart raced. He clutched the old radio tight in his hands and approached him. "Excuse, Major?" Thomas Harrow turned and looked at him curiously. "Can I help you?" I live in the subway tunnels," Elijah stammered. "I fixed this radio. I heard your voice. I want to learn how to make lights like you." Silence. Mr. Harrow crouched down eye level with Elijah. "You fixed that radio by yourself in a tunnel." Elijah nodded. A slow, amazed smile spread across Mr. Harrow's face. "Then I think you've already created your first light." And just like that, Elijah's world changed. Mr. Harrow brought him back to the organization's workshop. It wasn't much, just a cramped garage space filled with wires, batteries, and tiny solar panels. But to Elijah, it was a sanctuary. He got a hot shower for the first time in years, a warm meal, clean blanket. But most importantly, he was asked a question he hadn't heard in forever. "What do you want to learn?" Elijah's answer came without hesitation. "I want to make light, so people like me won't have to live in the dark again." From that day on, Elijah became an apprentice at Light Forward. He absorbed knowledge at a breathtaking pace. Wires, switches, circuits, they were like a second language to him. The boy who once relied on candlelight was now designing powerful solar grids for shelters and community centers. Word about him began to spread. Volunteers, donors, even local news crews wanted to meet the boy from the tunnel. But Elijah stayed grounded. When asked about his dream, he simply said, "I don't want fame. I just want to light up the places where people are still invisible." 3 years had passed since Elijah climbed out of that tunnel. At 17, he was no longer the shadow of a child scavenging through trash, but a young man with purpose and skill. Every morning, he arrived at Light Forward's workshop in Brooklyn, where he now led a small team installing solar lighting systems in temporary housing units and shelters. People admired his work ethic and quiet determination. But few knew that, deep down, Elijah had never truly left the tunnel. He still carried the memory of every crack in the walls, every dripping pipe, and every gust of cold air that used to chill him to the bone. It wasn't trauma anymore, it was a reminder, a reason to keep going. One day, Light Forward received a significant donation from a private humanitarian foundation. At the board meeting, Mr. Harrow turned to Elijah and asked, "You've got the experience now. Where do you want to lead the next big project?" Elijah didn't hesitate. "I want to go back to the tunnel." The room fell quiet. Someone asked, "You mean to install lights where no one even lives?" But Elijah replied with calm conviction, "People do live there. They're just hidden, like I once was. And light is the only way to say to them, 'We see you. You matter.'" And so Project Tunnel Light was born. Elijah and his team designed a custom solar lighting system meant specifically for underground, low-oxygen, high-moisture environments. The lights were motion-activated, vandal-proof, and built to last. They even included USB charging stations powered by solar panels hidden above ground, with energy stored in waterproof battery units. When installation day came, Elijah led his crew back to the tunnel. His heart pounded as he descended the familiar staircase. The scent of rust, mildew, and old memories lingered in the air. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't alone. He wasn't there to hide. He was there to illuminate. The first light flicked on with a soft click. A wide beam of gentle, warm light cut through years of darkness. Elijah stood beneath it, silent, eyes glistening. This was where he had once curled up on freezing nights, clinging to hope like a candle in the wind. Now, that same space glowed with life. Over the next few days, people began emerging from the shadows, hesitant, frightened. Men and women who had burrowed into the same darkness Elijah had known. They peeked around corners, shielding their eyes. From the brightness, unsure whether this was real or another danger, Elijah met each of them with kindness. He didn't ask why they were there. He simply handed them flashlights, warm socks, granola bars, and clean water. "You don't owe me anything," he said to one man who couldn't stop crying. "I just want you to know, someone sees you." Organized check-ins with local outreach. Workers and even arranged for mobile clinics to stop by weekly. What was once a forgotten pit of despair slowly became a place of rest, safety, and connection. A reporter from a major newspaper eventually caught wind of the story. The next week, a headline ran across the city: "The boy who brought light back to the tunnel." But Elijah didn't read it. He wasn't interested in praise or attention. When someone handed him a copy of the article, he just smiled and said, "I didn't do it to be noticed. I did it so that when some other kid ends up down there, they'll know they're not alone." That night, Elijah returned to the tunnel. By himself. He sat in the same corner where his old radio used to rest. The walls were the same. The smell hadn't changed. But the light above him was new, soft, constant, and real. He pulled the old radio from his backpack. It still worked, barely. He turned the dial and listened to the static, then to a distant voice. He smiled. In a city that never sleeps, where millions of stories rise and fall each day, Elijah wants just another forgotten child in the dark was now a source of light. And that light was only just beginning to spread. Months after Project Tunnel Light began, Elijah noticed something remarkable. People weren't just using the lights, they were beginning to help one another. A man named Curtis, who had been homeless for over a decade, began repairing broken flashlights for others. A quiet woman known only as Miss D started sharing food from a little cart she pushed into the tunnel every day. Elijah didn't organize these things. They happened naturally. He had brought lights, but the people inside had brought kindness. The transformation caught the attention of city officials. At first, they approached cautiously. One representative even suggested that clearing out the tunnel would be the logical next step, citing safety concerns. Elijah stood up at that meeting and said, "You don't make people disappear by removing the only light they have. If we want to change lives, we don't start with eviction. We start with empathy." His speech was recorded and quietly shared on social media. It went viral within days. Suddenly, what Elijah had created wasn't just a story, it was a movement. Volunteers from other cities reached out, asking for help replicating the lighting system in tunnels, alleyways, and abandoned buildings across the country. A nonprofit in Chicago launched the Underground Light Project, inspired by Elijah's work. Los Angeles started a similar initiative in its subway system. But Elijah didn't chase any of that. He stayed rooted, while others were scaling. The idea, he remained in New York, visiting the tunnel every week, talking to the people, listening, learning. He understood something many others overlooked. True change wasn't measured by the number of lights installed, but by how many hearts were touched. One evening, Elijah walked into the tunnel and found a girl no older than 9 sitting near one of the charging stations. She held a torn backpack, her face hidden beneath a hoodie. Her hands trembled. Elijah sat a few feet away and waited. After a while, he quietly said, "I used to sit right there, same spot. Was the darkest corner before the lights." Girl didn't respond, but she didn't run. "I had a radio," he continued. "Fixed it myself. That's how I found hope." She finally turned her head slightly. Her eyes were tired but curious. Elijah pulled a small flashlight from his coat pocket and handed it to her. "This one's yours. No batteries needed to charge us in the sun." She took it carefully, as if it were a sacred object. Then, softly, she whispered, "Are you the boy they talk about? The one who lit up the tunnel?" Elijah chuckled. I guess I am. But you don't have to be a boy to bring light. You just need to believe the dark isn't the end of the story. From that moment on, she became a regular. Her name was Ava. Slowly, with gentle encouragement and support from outreach volunteers, she began to trust again. Within a few months, she was placed in foster care with a family who had read about Elijah and wanted to help other kids like him. Elijah visited her once a month, always bringing new tools, little notebooks, and stories about circuits and sunlight. She called him Teacher of the Tunnel. By the end of that year, Project Tunnel Light had brought basic illumination to 4 more underground sites across the city. But Elijah didn't think of it in numbers. He thought of Curtis, Misty, Ava, the countless others who now had a reason to look up and see brightness where there was once only black. And every time someone asked him why he kept going back, Elijah would smile and say, because light doesn't stop once it's lit, it spreads. It was a cold December morning when Elijah received a letter. Not an email, not a message through social media, but a real, handwritten letter sealed in an envelope with no return address. The handwriting was shaky, the ink slightly smudged. Inside, it read, I was there the night you fixed that first radio. I watched you crawl through the dark, scared but still moving. I was too ashamed to speak. But I watched, I listened, and when the light came, I followed it out. I'm okay now. I have a job, a room, and a window that faces the sun. You saved me without knowing it. Thank you, Jay. Elijah read it again and again, the words soaking in like rain on dry earth. He didn't know who Jay was. He never would. But it didn't matter. That single letter said what he had always hoped to hear. Deep down, what you did mattered. That evening, Elijah returned to the tunnel one last time, not to install more lights, not to fix broken wires, but simply to sit. Hum of the low-voltage lamps echoed gently above. The walls that once dripped sadness now stood silent and warm, gently glowing. He placed the letter inside a plastic sleeve and taped it to the wall beneath the very first light they had installed. Around it, he placed small photos of the people who had once lived there: Curtis, Misty, Ava, even the stray dogs that had found shelter there over the years. Above it all, he wrote, in the darkest places, we lit a spark. And it grew. Elijah wasn't looking to be remembered as a hero. In fact, most people still didn't know his full story. He declined interviews, rejected book deals, and turned down offers to commercialize the project. Because for him, this wasn't about fame or legacy, it was about dignity, about reminding the forgotten that they are not invisible. That even in the lowest, coldest places, light can find a way in. And more importantly, it can grow from within. In the years that followed, Elijah quietly trained other youth who had survived homelessness. He taught them circuitry, solar energy, and repair skills. But most importantly, he taught them something no textbook ever could. You are not broken. You are not unwanted. You are a light in someone's tunnel, just don't know it yet. And so, the boy who once scavenged through trash for a broken radio became the silent spark behind a nationwide movement. Because he had more, but because he remembered what it was like to have nothing, and still chose to give. That tunnel in Brooklyn is now a protected community space. And if you ever walk past it on a quiet night, you might see a soft light glowing from beneath the street. A reminder that someone once cared enough to bring light into the darkest place he knew. And for every person who walks into the dark, frayed and alone, Elijah's story waits not as a headline, not as a monument, but as a silent beam of hope. You are not alone. Someone sees you, and there is light waiting to meet you. Elijah's story isn't just about overcoming darkness. It's about choosing to light the way for others, even when you barely have enough light for yourself. It reminds us that every act of kindness, no matter how small, can echo far beyond what we'll ever see. Right now, there are thousands of people living in invisible corners of our city's abandoned tunnels. alleyways, shelters, and even streets we pass by every day. Many of them are children. Many of them feel like the world has forgotten them. But what if we could be the ones to remind them they're not alone? You don't need to start a nonprofit or engineer solar lights to make a difference. Sometimes it starts with a conversation. It's a warm meal, a backpack filled with essentials, a donated flashlight. It's a few minutes of your time, or simply a little human dignity. So we invite you after watching this video to take one small action. Today, look up local outreach programs or shelters and see how you can help. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below telling us what light means to you. And most importantly, don't turn away from those in the dark. Because like Elijah once said, you don't need a lot to give. You just need to believe that even a flicker of light can change someone's life. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Real Moments. Together, let's light up the forgotten corners one story, one soul, one spark at a time.